The handicapped man, since we don't know his name, we'll make one up. Let's call him Zach. Zach moved unnoticed through the crowd that was gathering at the synagogue. He slipped into his customary seat, waiting for the beginning of prayers. There was nothing remarkable about the event, and no one paid him any mind, for he was not among the wealthy or the learned, just a humble man, half a man in some people's eyes, barely able to eke out a substance with that crippled hand. It was an ordinary Sabbath day, and he didn't expect anything out of the ordinary to happen. He didn't expect to leave there restored and filled with joy, but he would, because this was no ordinary day. Extraordinary things were about to happen. The extraordinary had already begun outside the synagogue in a wheat field. The new young rabbi had been on his way to that same synagogue, walking through the field, when some of his followers had reached out and grabbed a few heads of ripened wheat, rubbed them together in their hands, and let the chaff drop to the ground before popping the kernels in their mouths. Well, such an act would have passed unnoticed on any other day, but this was not to be an ordinary day. It was to be a day of liberation, a day of joy, a day of healing, an extraordinary day. But before that, it would be a day of confrontation. The scribes and the Pharisees had been following Jesus and his disciples like a pack of paparazzi pursuing a politician, waiting for him to make some little mistake to be written up in the morning's headlines. These were the same guys who'd criticized Jesus for attending Matthew's celebration 2 days earlier, who'd tried to make it look like he was less holy than they were, since they were fasting while he was feasting. But as usual, Jesus had had a ready response for them, and they had left that encounter bested, embarrassed, and all the more angry. They were all the more determined to catch him in some infraction of the law, something that they could use to accuse him of being a lawbreaker and an unworthy teacher. They got their chance when they spotted Jesus' disciples picking and eating grain out in the field on the way to the synagogue on Sabbath. According to the Pharisees, the disciples had broken the Sabbath 4 ways that morning: reaping the grain, threshing it, winnowing it, and sorting it. Mark chapter 2 and verse 24 points out that they were quick with their accusations. And the Pharisees said, "Look, why do they do what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" See, they wanted to make Jesus out to be a lawbreaker or a libertine, a radical free thinker. That way they could discredit him and turn the people away from him. But as usual, Jesus was ready for them. In fact, he was one step ahead of them. He and his disciples stopped at the edge of the field and delayed their trip to the synagogue long enough for Jesus to tell the Pharisees a little story. Didn't they remember their Bible history, he asked? Hadn't they read about the time that David and his followers were hungry? What had they done? They'd gone to the tabernacle and eaten some of the holy bread that was supposed to be reserved only for the priests. And neither the priests nor God had condemned them for it. There was to be a lesson learned from that story. Rules and regulations have their place, but God is more interested in meeting people's needs than he is in rules and regulations. Then, having told the story, Jesus and his disciples continued on their journey to the synagogue where Zach was, to where Zach was about to have a date with destiny, an encounter that would change his life and fill him with joy. When he came into the synagogue, no one else had paid any attention to Zach, the man with the crippled hand. But Jesus paid attention. And when he did, so did everyone else. Jesus loved to heal people. He loved to see their lives changed, their bodies restored, their spirits raised to new levels of joy. And he wanted to do that for Zach. But as he looked around the synagogue, he knew that was not what the Pharisees wanted. They didn't care a thing about Zach or his crippled hand. All they cared about was enforcing rules and regulations, especially if they could use those rules to discredit Jesus and make him look like a lawbreaker. All eyes turned to Jesus. What would he do? Now, this little 10-part devotional series is about the joy of Jesus. But I want you to notice something here in the middle of this story in Mark chapter 3, verses 4 to 5. Then Jesus asked them, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they remained silent. He looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. Yes, Jesus got angry. In fact, the word translated anger here is actually the word for wrath. Jesus was really upset, disgusted that people could have such hard hearts. I mean, not much made Jesus angry, but self-righteous, uncaring, judgmental, holier-than-thou hypocrites really got to him, because he really cared about people, all people. And when you really care, you get upset when people are treated as something less than human. Jesus looked at those Pharisees in anger, but he looked at Zach with a smile, with loving eyes, with a soft voice. And he said 4 simple words in verse 5. "Stretch out your hand." And the man stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. Now, the Bible story doesn't tell us how Zach responded. It doesn't tell us about the joy that must have filled his heart. It doesn't tell us how his family reacted when they saw him healed. But can you imagine? There must have been a lot of wild, delirious joy in Capernaum that day. The Bible doesn't tell us how Jesus responded either. But can't you see him looking into the eyes of that man who has just had his hand fully restored and sharing a smile, an exclamation of excitement, a sentence or two of praise to God, an expression of joy? Jesus loved to spread joy wherever he went. What the Bible does tell us is how the Pharisees responded. Here it is in Mark 3, verse 6. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. They wanted to kill him. Why? Just because he had healed a man on the Sabbath? No. That healing there in the synagogue was just the last straw. It was just one more instance of Jesus refusing to fit within the narrow set of sourpuss rules that the religious authorities enforced. You see, the scribes and the Pharisees saw religion one way, and Jesus saw it quite another. Jesus had made the point very clearly out in the wheat field. When the Pharisees accused the disciples of breaking the Sabbath commandment by popping a few grains of wheat into their mouths, Jesus responded by telling them that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, Mark 2:27. Do you catch the significance of that simple statement? You see, the Pharisees treated the Sabbath commandment and all of God's commandments like a list of don'ts, a negative compendium of things one shouldn't do. They made the Sabbath out to be a downer, a day God had created selfishly for himself, a day he kept for himself, a day that he had taken away from mankind. It was a debt from man's account. One day in 7 in which people couldn't do what they wanted. But Jesus reversed that. Notice he said, the Sabbath was made for man. It was not a debt from our account, but a credit, a gift from God. The Sabbath was God's gift to Adam and Eve, a whole day of celebration and joy, a party that God was taking off that day to spend with his kids. A day of joy for all creation because it was time to spend with the beloved Creator. For Jesus, the Sabbath was not a solemn day of don'ts. It was a joyful day of joyful do's. Do good. Do help others. Do spend time with your Heavenly Father, learning to be more like Him. The Pharisees saw the law as a cease and desist order. Jesus saw it as a do and delight privilege. Take the Sabbath day, he said. God has given it to you as a gift. Use it as a time for learning, to delight in the things of God and doing the works of God. Use it to restore, to heal, to bring joy. And friend, it's not only the Sabbath that Jesus wants us to see that way. He wants us to learn to see all of God's laws that way. They are His gift to you to bring joy into your life. Oh, and there's another gift He's given as well. A gift that He has given only to human beings. It's a gift that's all wrapped up in joy. Do you know what that is? David Smith will help me tell you in tomorrow's devotional.